Well, today we get to start a new sermon series called The Bible According to Dr. Seuss. And if you couldn't tell from Cheryl's offertory music, it has to do with Grinch today. You know, of course, when we think of famous theologians throughout all the ages, Dr. Seuss probably isn't the first one that comes to most of our minds. But yet, in most of his stories, there's a theme that relates to Scripture. You know, when I first decided to do this sermon series, I shared the idea with some of our youth, and they loved the idea, of course. And so I invited them actually to help me out. They chose which Dr. Seuss stories that I would preach about every week, and they chose some of the scriptures that go along with the stories. And then they shared with me some of the ideas or themes that they thought were biblical in those stories. And so I took all of that, all the information that they shared, and I added a little bit of my own insights, and I'm going to share that message with you today. So today we start off with the famous story, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. How many people have never heard this story before? Okay, I was just curious if there's, it's old, it's traditional, it's a classic, but there's always someone who may not know it. If you're not that familiar with it, or it's been a little while, the story starts off with some people called the Whos. And the Whos lived in, well, where else would Whos live but Whoville? Yeah, exactly. You guys know. You guys are smart. They lived in Whoville, and they were some really, really happy people, really loving people. They loved life, and they loved Christmas. It's also a story about a guy who lived out on the outskirts of town, who didn't like all the celebrating that came with Christmas. He didn't like all the happiness, and he didn't like the Whos, and especially the happiness the Whos had at Christmas. Let's hear some of these opening words right now from Dr. Seuss. Let me read. I put my glasses down. I won't be able to read. Thank you, Jody. Even though it's in big Dr. Seussian print, I still... This is just how it starts, first couple pages. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot. But the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville did not. The Grinch hated Christmas the whole Christmas season. Now, please don't ask why. No one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be, perhaps, that his shoes were too tight. But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was two sizes too small. The Grinch. The Grinch hated the happiness that Christmas brought to the Whos, and so he decided that he wanted to ruin Christmas for them. Could you imagine someone wanting to ruin Christmas for you? And so he snuck down into the town on Christmas Eve. He was dressed up as Santa Claus. He stole all the Christmas trees, all the Christmas decorations. He stole the stockings and their bows. And he stole all the toys under the trees that Santa had brought. He did all this while the Whos were sleeping. You know, I would imagine something like that would be devastating for anyone. I've had my car broken into before and things just rifled through and things stolen. I've never had a house broken into, but I couldn't even imagine what that would have to feel like. And some of you actually here have shared with me stories of that. Someone had their house broken into a few weeks ago from our community here. And just how they felt. And, you know, I've heard people say that they feel violated and angry and scared. I imagine that's what the Grinch in our story wanted the people of Whoville to feel, scared and violated and upset, disappointed. The Grinch was miserable and wanted other people to feel the same. His heart had shrunk. It was probably hard as stone. He had lost his way somehow and turned into a lonely, angry, and bitter person. And he wanted others to feel the same way. He thought that he would do that by ruining Christmas for them. But that's not what happened. Christmas wasn't ruined. See, the people in Whoville knew that Christmas isn't about a gift that you receive under a tree, that Christmas means something much more. And the Whos knew that Christmas meant much more than a gift or something you buy at a store. I mean, the Grinch, he was lonely. He was sad. We don't know why. Maybe he thought the Whos wouldn't accept him in their town. Maybe he felt like an outsider looking in. Any of us can feel like an outsider from time to time. Perhaps, someone new to the area can definitely feel like an outsider. How do we treat them? How do we treat people that move in next door to us? How do we welcome them? People new to our church can feel like outsiders looking in as well, too, wondering, will they accept me? Will they allow me to participate? Will they love me for who I am? How do we treat them? How do we welcome them? Whatever the reason, the Grinch didn't get involved in with the Who's in Whoville. The Grinch, instead, he grew bitter and angry. And he eventually wanted the Who's to be upset and angry and bitter and depressed as well. He wanted to bring the Who's down to his level. Maybe then he wouldn't feel so bad. Might even make him happy for a little bit, seeing them miserable. Because after all, misery loves company sometimes, doesn't it? The youth that had helped me plan this sermon said that the Grinch probably didn't have God in his heart. Maybe that's true. Maybe he did at one time, but he lost his spirituality somehow. It can happen over time to any of us. You can be on fire for God and be the most loving person ever. But if you don't keep the fire in your heart, you can lose that spirituality. Life situations happen which causes us to, sometimes just lose our faith. Maybe not completely, but maybe just lose that hope and joy that we once had. That's what our scripture from Hebrews was all about. It's really a warning about that we can't turn away from God. It's telling us to keep our eyes focused on God. Don't let our hearts get hardened or shrink 3 sizes too small. Our hearts can get hardened for many different reasons. And the scripture tells us that as a community of faith, it's up to all of us to help each other from getting hard hearts. Specifically in the scripture, it tells us to do this by exhorting one another. Exhortation, it really means to lift up, to encourage, saying an encouraging word now and then. Exhortation is a great way to keep the fire burning, but it has to go both ways. We need to be people who encourage others, and others need to be encouraging us. That's what a community should be doing. That's what the Who's were singing about, if you caught that. They were clasping each other's hands. They said, you know what, it doesn't matter. I don't remember the exact words in the song. It doesn't matter what's going on as long as we're here to clasp each other's hands. That's what's important. It was a rough moment for them. But in their community, they found hope. Hope in each other. Hope in their faith, knowing that Christmas wasn't about presents. Right now, think about your own life. All of us, our own lives. Is there someone in our life who maybe we feel hasn't treated us the way we want to be treated? When's the last time we've lifted them up? When's the last time we've prayed for them? When's the last time we've said an encouraging word to them? When's the last time we've reached a hand out in friendship? If we see someone is down or depressed or angry, how do we respond to them? Are we encouraging to them? Or do we try to incite them even more? Everyone has a bad day. Everyone can lose their temper. Do we respond back in love? That's what the scripture from Hebrews is asking us and encouraging us and telling us to do. Or there's the opposite. There's the other side. If you know someone who's been going through something rough and tough, do we just say, it's better if I just don't say anything and walk away? Or do we try to extend that hand in friendship? The scripture is telling us we need to be encouraging every day as long as it's called today. I love that. As long as today is called today, you need to be encouraging others, is what it's saying. We don't know from the story, but did the Who's ever try reaching out to the Grinch? Did they ever try showing him genuine kindness and love? It's easy to just point a finger and say someone's a Grinch, but the scripture is calling us to do more. Because a loving and supporting community is necessary for everyone. It's important that we clasp hands and lift each other up, because tragedy will hit at some point. It did for the Who's. They lost everything, but yet they were still able to hold hands, hold each other up, and sing. Our scripture from James says that when we face trials, we need to rejoice. I've always wrestled with that scripture. I don't know about anyone else, but it's, whenever you're persecuted, rejoice. That is hard to do. I don't usually rejoice when I face trials. I don't usually rejoice when I face hardships. But I think there's a way we can rejoice. We can rejoice because we have people around us during those hard times. Those who are still clasping our hands and holding on. Those who are encouraging us to keep going, to keep hope in our hearts. Those people who, no matter what has happened, won't turn their backs on us. That's what we're called to do as Christians. Each and every one of us. We're called to be the kind of people who reach out a hand to everyone, even to the Grinches. We're called to reach out in love and not turn our backs on them, to be the kind of people who support each other and never let go. And when one does drift off, like the good old Grinch did in our story, we still need to welcome them back into our family without judging, without ridicule, and only with love. Is there someone in your life who's been a Grinch to you? Have you reached your hand out to them? Have you tried encouraging them? Have you forgiven them? Have you tried showing them love? It's a hard teaching. But most of Jesus' teachings are hard teachings. Our scriptures for today embody most of Jesus' teachings. Reach out in love, even to the undesirable, even to those who have persecuted you, even to those who have crucified you. Forgive and love. And that's what Jesus taught us. So let me leave you with these words. Encourage them all, those big and those small. Reach out in love. It's the Christian call. Clasp their hands. Don't ever let go. May your heart and theirs continue to grow.